The mullet. It's a mullet. Is that a mullet?
Oh,
Can I have a beer while we're doing this?
that's lovely.
Is it okay if I paint while we're doing this?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I watch a movie. I'm not watching the movie. I'm drawing or painting.
That's ADHD. I think most people would agree that our next guest is a Renaissance man. Would you agree, Meg?
I would agree.
He was involved in the early Canadian graffiti movement back in the early 90s. He has become a staple in the Winnipeg art scene. He has worked with international graffiti legends like Ernie Velez and C. Adams, to name a few. In 1998, he co-founded the Graffiti Art Gallery, which has showcased more than 700 emerging artists, which he is currently the artistic director for. He graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Manitoba. He has been part of many really cool initiatives supporting countless numbers of charities. He's a tattoo artist, a handyman, a dog lover, but I think he will agree that his greatest title is that of Proud Father. Welcome to the podcast, Pat Lazo.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So there's probably a lot more that I didn't add. I probably left out a bunch of stuff, but we can touch on that because you're always doing something. And I know for me, when things are chaotic, that's calming. When things are a little slowed down, it's like that's when I get a little restless. Is that the case for you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We should note that he's
100%.
painting right now while we're recording this podcast.
That's true. Yes. So he's
Yeah.
drinking a beer, he's painting, and doing a podcast. So that's ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Well, have you ever heard of it's called the Ideas Podcast? It's a CBC podcast. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
So they have an episode called Neurodiversity and the Myth of Normal. And they talk about the gene, the DRD4 gene. That gene is what kind of controls our dopamine. It influences dopamine. So we have a version of that, which is the 7R gene. They call it the rock star gene. I don't know if you've ever heard of like people with ADHD have the rock star gene or like the restless gene.
Yeah.
Gets us like I know like I think Pat's a little bit like me where it's like we're constantly doing something and we can't sit still and stuff like that. Is that kind of how you are?
I can't sit still for a very long time, or if I am sitting, then I have to be doing multiple things. Like I'll send 1 or 2 emails maximum, and then I'll get up and I'll walk around the gallery, and then I need to do something. Then I'll go back and then do another email or whatnot. But it's challenging that way.
Well, like both of us, you were diagnosed in adulthood, like quite not that long ago, right?
February.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I had no idea, and then I looked into it, and I was like, oh wow, because a friend of mine had been assessed in her 30s, a coworker, and then her father, who was a professor and a doctor, saw the self-assessment, and then he said, wait a second. Then he got assessed, and he is in his 60s, and he just recently got diagnosed, like as of like last year or a couple of years or something like that. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, that might be something I
should look into.
that's probably me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what was that? What was your reaction when you found out?
It's almost a relief or something. Like, cause I always feel like I've always felt like even in my own friend group, different. Like as But so it kind of makes sense. Like I think.
Yeah, it's like a weird sense of belonging.
Yeah.
When I first heard your first one, remember when I called you and I left you that crazy message and I was like, oh my God, other people have this too.
Oh, for me, yeah. Well, that was kind of like I think I've always looked up to you, Pat, because like I feel like we're very similar in the sense of like we're just always constantly trying to do different things, and I always felt different, but I really tried to fit into like these groups when I was there, and I feel like you've always kind of, and maybe this is just from a perception, but you've always kind of just did your own thing, right? You always like, I'm going to do this, and I don't care what anyone thinks.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, definitely. I have less of a dependency on outside approval, like, and it just feels right for me to be doing a bunch of things, but it makes it hard to focus, like when I have to hunker down and like do something that has got a serious timeline and like that sort of thing. So especially with like at a not for profit with deadlines and stuff for funding, I was terrible with that kind of stuff. Like I'm not at all like a very good administrator, you know, like I'm poor at that. You know, that's probably not going to be good for my LinkedIn to have this.
Well, I think that's kind of what we're trying to change here is that there's things that we're really, really good at. And if we're allowed to do those things and not bogged down by the stuff that is very challenging, we'll see a lot more innovation and creativity come out of those people because that's really I think what's happening right now is you see
Yeah,
are put into these it's environment, right? At the end of the day, if your environment is not working for you, that's the difference between success and not succeeding.
yeah, yeah. I can agree with that. And the interest in the tasks, it varies so much. If I can get enthused about something, I can just hyper focus and like I will not be defeated by this thing. Like it's sort of a friend of mine. I had him over. This is a funny story. I had him over for dinner one Friday night last summer, and we were putting together. I had been putting together the plumbing for the pool, for our stock tank pool in the backyard. It's like an 8-foot round pool with like, but I bought a pool pump from a 30-foot in-ground pool, and I put it in there, and it's like, so it was like overpowered, like overkill for sure. But I had my friend over for dinner, and I had been to McMahon Yates to buy plumbing parts so many times. I was like, oh God, I'm not gonna be defeated by this thing. I'm not. I'm tomorrow's supposed to be 35 out. Me and Owen are going swimming tomorrow. Like there's no way that I'm gonna be defeated. So I figured out how I could Frankenstein these parts together and not have to go to McMahon Yates while I was cooking dinner for my friend who I hadn't seen in months. And he's like, I'm like, do you mind following me while I go back and forth to the garage? And so we can just keep our conversation going. And it was funny because he mentioned, and he's a doctor, and he was like, this is really interesting. You're like so hyper focused on this, like almost in an Asperger's way, like, and this is last year, like, but I was still keeping conversation and figuring out this plumbing situation, and then cooking the steaks medium rare. It wasn't a super complicated meal or anything, but yeah, it was just funny. Like I know this guy's coming for dinner. I could have put the stuff down, but I wouldn't have it. I'm like, we're going swimming tomorrow. It's gonna take all night to fill. It's gonna, like we're swimming tomorrow. It's gonna be 30 out.
Well, that probably I know from like I do that quite often, and it drives Lindsay insane because it's like and then if somebody interrupts me while I'm trying to do that stuff, I just get so irritated, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Have you found anything that is more difficult since you started taking medication?
More difficult? I don't know. I found myself being creative for the medication. Still find myself being creative, but like, I'm not sure about more difficult.
I guess when I first got diagnosed, my doctor had said to me, just letting you know that there's a lot of things that you're probably really, really good at right now that you might not be as good at
Yeah,
when you take this.
that's interesting. I wonder what that might be for me if that's the case, because I was wondering what was going on in my head when I started looking into this. I was like, before I go to bed is like when my head is going crazy, and I'm in the studio. Like I would come in at 10 o'clock after Owen goes to sleep, and then start doing something. But my things don't start rolling. The momentum to make something or get it started doesn't happen right away. So it starts going, and then before I go to bed, it's like 1 or 2 o'clock, and I'm like, I started writing down the last thoughts in my head while I'm making something, and then just to track what I was thinking, and I can't remember what it was I was making, but I ended up going downstairs to get a tool, getting a piece of plexiglass, and like, oh, I could use this for this thing, another project that I had. And then because I had found a scrap, and I was like, and then I ended up having this list. I had two like full size sheets, like just with all the thoughts in the last 15 minutes before trying to go to sleep. And then I did it again the next night, and I'm just like, oh, this can't be, like, I think I have to check this out. Like, I think it's now. So I called my neighbor who's a nurse practitioner, and she said that there was a self-assessment thing that you can do, and then you do it with your doctor, and then they can, you go see them and see what the best options are. Yeah, and across the board, like I was just like, yeah, just like forgetting things, walk into a room, forget what you came in there for. I think it seems like I do that all the time. Like, but
Do you know which type of ADHD you have?
no, no.
So one's inattentive, one's hyperactive, and then one's combined. So I have combined, but it's the spectrum is like a wheel, right? And so my
Hmm.
where I like go through the roof is the hyperactivity, like impulse control. And so for me, it's like if I have something that's like releasing dopamine in my head, I just
Yeah,
chase that. And so I'll do that for hours and hours and hours, and it's
yeah.
I can't stop it. And but then while I'm doing that, I'm also now doing 50 things. And like what you said, where you go down to get a tool, I remember the other day I was sweeping something, and I had to go get the dustpan. And an hour or so later, I was downstairs rearranging and cleaning up all the stuff because I couldn't find the dustpan. And then I started organizing all the tools to go to the Salvation Army.
Oh my God.
And they're all downstairs, and I came up and I was like, "Oh yeah, looking for the dustpan," because the thing pile of dirt was on the floor,
Yeah.
and I was like, completely forgot that that's what I went to go do.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I end up creating projects going to get. Oh, it's like cool because you're like thinking. I'm like, oh, I have this. This would be perfect for that. At the gallery, so it happens at work, but I've got access to these tools, and like I could just whip that up and like, oh, I just made a cart to like bring my big bench that I just built over here by myself, so I don't have to ask anyone to help me. Or now we could use it to move furniture, and like, oh, I can't have those casters that I've been hoarding for like 2 or 3 years, like I just put in the corner and collecting dust, like.
That's funny about the collect. Like I save, and I don't know if you do this too, Meg, but like I'll save so many things because I'm like, oh, I could use this for something. I try to bring stuff to like donation because it's like, okay, let's get rid of all this stuff. But then I go to the donation and start buying. Ooh, I could use this. I could,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, casters. All right, like
yeah,
everything. Right?
yeah. You know how much casters are? I'm like, they're so expensive.
So yeah, even like brackets for shelves. I always like
Oh,
I find those. I'm like, oh, I stack those up.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
we should start a ADHD swap meet, and it's like all these
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
things we have. Like, let's okay. I
That's
got
actually a
some
good
casters.
idea.
Who needs casters? I got this. I got that. I have a question. '98, you met Steve Wilson. Tell us about who that is, and tell us about that.
I was working at a skateboard shop, and I was in art school at the time. A friend of mine called the shop and said, "Hey Pat, check this out. There's like a poster that says like looking for graffiti artists. If you think you have skills with a can, call this number." And then so I called him and asked if he was a cop. Turns out he wasn't a cop, but he was a penitentiary like a corrections officer at Stony, and he just like wanted to do something more proactive and work with people like different place, like not so far into the system, that kind of thing, and really and try and make a difference, right? So I reached out to him, and then I met him, and we started doing paintings and murals and stuff like that, and then it turns out that all the kids from the neighborhood, we were in Elmwood, a lot of those kids like to do what we were doing, like they wanted to paint and draw and stuff. So we ended up moving to Higgins, and we saw that the kids were like hanging on the train, going over the bridge on the train and coming down the CP main line where we were on Higgins, and they would jump off and then like come to hang out at the gallery. We're like, oh, that's freaking dangerous. And then the kids from North Point Douglas would walk over the tracks and come to us where we were, which is like a semi-industrial area. It was like, I guess, considered low track before for sex trafficking, and like, but yeah, long gone are those days. We started art programming at the gallery because the kids had nothing to do after 3:30, so we offered free after school art programming. Yeah, and that's kind of how we started.
Well, you also did. I know you worked with on that Churchill project with Cal.
Yes, Seawall's Pangea Seed and Seawall's Churchill. Seawalls was like a project, I guess, to raise awareness about environmental. So they get artists from international mural artists to do murals for no money, and but they'll fly them to all these places and then take them there and then house them, and it helps raise awareness for the cause of the like in the environment. And that was like raising awareness about the sea ice returning a lot later in the year and that sort of thing. That was a fun project.
Yeah, because there's a bunch of artists that were involved in that, eh?
Yeah, a lot, and like from Germany and all Spain and all over the place. It was great.
Oh, wow.
Speaking of Cal, the Goodwill Social Club, you were part of a mural that's in the back that's still there, and
Oh
you
yeah,
drew your son, right?
yeah,
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 which is great. And I guess that's the question I was going to ask because our sons are pretty close to the same age. They're both,
yeah,
my wife calls them 50 50s, so they're half Filipino,
yeah,
half my son's
yeah,
half Métis, but
yeah,
they're very similar. I watch Owen on the Instagram and my son, and they're quite alike. And so
yeah.
I guess my question is, do you see a lot of like the traits of ADHD in your son?
I do, I do, and like, do you?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Like, I mean, there's the emotional part, but I mean, he's also very young, right? So I don't like, but then there's the hard to stay focused on something. It's good now that people are understanding what this is and that. Like, if the case is that that's what it is, then at least like we'd have something to go on, you know, like and how to adapt to teaching and working with that.
Yeah, well, that was my main concern, I think, when I was diagnosed and learning that there's a genetic component to this is
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
so that's really why I started doing this. But it's also therapeutic, like Megan and I talked about, like just talking about it and like talking. It's
Yeah,
hard to explain that to somebody who doesn't understand that your brain
yeah,
is going constantly. But if we're doing something we love, it's like the best
yeah,
thing ever. So and so I
yeah,
see in my son a lot of those traits, but I see a lot of those really good traits of like being creative and
yeah.
being a bit defiant.
Those types of things, especially now, like with you guys kind of having this understanding of it while they're so young, you can actually nurture it too and bring on so much other stuff that like we weren't would it ever have been considered in my family that I had it when I was
Yeah,
younger.
yeah, and like I mean, I'm like, how did I not even consider this at all? I have a full time job, but meanwhile, I want to. I always knew I had to paint, I had to do something, like I have to be creative, I have to make something. Otherwise, I don't feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Tattooing, paint, like even just building stuff. Like when the pandemic happened, and part of my identity is sort of like putting on art shows at the gallery. You know, I've been there for 25 years, and then to not have art shows for 3 years, what? Like, what am I going to do? So I bought a sewing machine. I started carving spoons. I bought like $200 in carving knives. And like, I ended up buying like bandsaw and like a chop saw and all this stuff, like, so I could start making spoon blank, like these little sculptures that I'm doing, you know, and then whatever. And then electronic. I started, oh, I want to I'm painting mural. I don't have a Bluetooth speaker. I could just buy a Bluetooth speaker, but I'm like, I have old car parts. Like, I could, like, car speakers. I'm like, I'm going to make a Bluetooth speaker, yet to finish it because I wanted to attach my DeWalt tool batteries to it, all this stuff. But yeah, but it just like,
I
I don't
think
know.
that's what I've had to kind of let go of. Is like when I would do a lot of these things that were kind of like considered a waste of time. It was like then I would feel a little bit depressed after because it was like, well, what did it accomplish? But I think learning that like it accomplished me doing something I was excited about in that moment. And then at some point, maybe I won't like it anymore and I'll go to the next thing.
Yeah, no, and I like learning new things. Like I started playing hockey at 38 years old. Yeah, the best. It's like one of the only things I'm physically getting better at every time I go. Like at 46 years old, you know,
Well,
like
we talked about you being a tattoo artist,
yeah,
and you started when you started tattooing, maybe
2007.
because I was one of your, I'll say, guinea pig. It was one of your first
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
things, and
yeah. One of
you
them,
did
yeah.
a great job. You did my you did my
Violet.
first ever tattoo actually, yeah, under my arm. Yeah, and you're still doing that.
Yeah, I'm at Osborne Village Inc. on
Yeah.
Osborne. Yeah, just Saturdays.
Well, I think you mentioned the pandemic too, because I think that is really the catalyst for a lot of people when discovering that they had this disorder because they were able to create their own environments for some of them, right? Because you were at home
Yeah,
and you needed to do, and
yeah,
also like, I need to do something. And that was for me, it was like I was diagnosed through the pandemic because it was my niece got diagnosed and then my sister, and then I always kind of suspected there was something.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the pandemic, because there was so much awareness through the pandemic, because everyone's executive functioning just went to shit, right? And so people were like, "What's
yeah,
going
yeah, yeah,
on?" And so we were learning more about it. But like my mind's
yeah,
like a like ping 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 like a pinball machine,
yeah.
right? It's like constant.
Yeah, no, I thought it. I heard this one. Popcorn thoughts. It's just like pop. Like it's like just before, and that's what it's like when it before going to bed, and you're just like, holy cow! Like,
Add that to the term bank.
Yeah, we have an analogy. What's would you call it? The term bank. The term bank.
Yeah.
That's like. Do you use a lot of analogies?
yeah, yeah, sort of. Well, I mean, the popcorn thing. So it's just like that's how the thoughts come into my head, and I'm just like, I can't stop.
Well, because that's kind of what I guess, and probably we use a lot of analogies because we're really trying to explain what's going on with us. And so
Yeah,
we can't just say, like, things are going crazy in my head. It's like we have to give them a visual example of what is going on so they can say, oh, okay.
yeah, no, no, and you know what? It's shitty because like some people just like, oh, is it your ADHD? Is it like, are you looking for an excuse?
Have you watched the Disruptors documentary?
No,
Yeah, it's on Apple TV. It's really good, especially like when you watch it, it gives you this sense of relief. And I guess, and this would be probably one of my last questions because it kind of relates to that. And I think they allude to it or somebody says something in this. But if someone told you right now that they could make your traits of ADHD go away, and you'd be like a neurotypical person, what would you say to that?
fuck no, no, there's no way.
Once I know how to utilize it and use it to my advantage, it's an asset.
Yeah,
When you watch that documentary, The Disruptors, the people in that, an astronaut and actors and comedians and all these people talking
Mhm.
about it, they wouldn't been able to do
yeah,
those things if they didn't have these traits, right? And I think that's why I think there's a
yeah,
lot more people that probably have this, but they're in the right environment. Like you
yeah,
have Justin Timberlake, or you have Michael
yeah,
Phelps, or you have like Richard Branson. They're doing what they love, and it's not hindering them. It's actually benefiting them.
yeah. And like to be totally honest, like I'm super thankful that my boss, when I told him about my diagnosis, and then he researched on how to work with, keep me on task, how to work with someone with ADHD, and because like creative problem solving is, I love doing that. Like people come to me and like ask me to like put out fires all the time. It was like building things, fixing things that like I've never fixed before, but like I mean, this isn't rocket science. We can figure it out. Like it's probably a YouTube video, and then
Well, we're resilient, right? I think resilience is one of the big things because I think, especially being an adult with like late diagnosis, you've gone through all of these like traumas or things in your life that like you got past it and it's allowing you to be a little bit more resilient. Yeah.
I think since having the whole experience of the NICU with my son, that's like been the, I'm like, I could be on the verge of bawling. I just hear like there's a hospital scene and like I hear the beep going, and then I'm like right back there, because like I just sat in front of his isolate for 115 days. So it's like I can hear that thing, like,
Well, I mean, you have so much appreciation, right?
yeah, yeah, I do.
But it's sometimes the emotions get the best of us. But yeah, for me, it's just
Yeah,
learning how to manage my own emotions and knowing how important it is because I
yeah,
was emotionally immature, right? I remember being in meetings with people
yeah,
and just it'd be like there's a running joke that you get Donovan in a red room and he's gonna go off. And it was embarrassing. I'd be like, well, why do I do that? Why can't I control
yeah,
that? Right. And it was, and also knowing more about myself, I can really empathize with other people and say,
yeah.
okay, they're,
And what did it take for you to come to an understanding about emotional immaturity? Like, did you see a therapist? What was it?
the under, knowing how those type of little traumas could affect your kid, like, and that's like by just
Yeah,
yelling, and you thinking that's one yell, like stop
yeah,
that or whatever. You do that over and over and over, then those are
yeah. They're
a
gonna
lot of the
internalize
reasons
it.
why. the ADHD, yeah. And so that really the funny one was that I started buying this. It was called A Little Spot of for my kids, and it was how to manage your emotions. And it was like you get this thing, and it was like here's feelings and here's emotions. And I didn't know they were two separate things. I thought,
Yeah, yeah,
and I'm 45,
yeah,
learning what feelings and emotions are. You can't really control a feeling, but you can control your emotion.
yeah,
And so I was like, oh. And I was teaching my kids
yeah.
this. I was like, okay. Diane Elber, I believe, is it's on the website. There's the books are
Okay.
on there.
I'm just, yeah, I'm glad to hear I'm not the only one. And it's like the more that I look into it, people, I went out for wings after hockey one night, and then somebody who's like, oh yeah, I have it. I've been taking medication all my life, and then I stopped taking it, and I think I'm going to get back on it now. Like because he can recognize when they start to like lose focus and in their work, right? I was like, oh, I was appreciative of the conversation, and like he's like, but
Yeah.
he's like, I've never told anyone that. I didn't tell my work that. I did. He's like, I'm telling you, like so just
Yeah, that because there's a stigma, right? And I think for me, now I tell everybody,
yeah,
everyone who will listen,
yeah,
and I wear it on my sleeve because it for me it's a bit of an advocacy thing because
yeah,
I see that our educational system is still putting kids in these environments that to me is somewhat abusive when you have a kid that can't sit in a chair and you're making them sit in this chair for
yeah,
hours and they're getting in trouble because think about they're a bomb ready to go
yeah,
off and they're disruptive and so they're kicked out of the class so then they're not
yeah,
learning or they're treated
yeah.
with all these and that's still
Yeah, and
happening.
it gets compounded. It gets compounded like year after, the more that
Yeah.
and then that follows you, right? So
So for me, it's the more I talk about it, the more people can say, "Oh, maybe I have
yeah,
this," right?
yeah. Well, I couldn't be if it wasn't for like the creative aspect of what I do at the gallery, I wouldn't be there if I didn't have those opportunities, and I get to work with amazing artists and that stuff, and then kids when a youth like, oh, I'm really into this stuff, like I'm into art, and then like 10 years later, like you see them and they're like doing it, that's pretty cool. It's like this one kid I taught in 2001. I did a workshop, Saint Norbert, and then I ran into him he was painting a mural with as an assistant with this other artist. You're Pat Lazo? I'm like, yep. I did a workshop with you in 2001, and yeah, you got the first can of spray paint in my hand, and like now I do this and do this, and like, and I'm in finishing art school, and like, I'm just like, oh, cool, like, yeah, he remembered me. I was like, oh wow, that's crazy. So,
But that's why you do it too, right? Like, and that's like, the exciting thing is just like you get to change people's lives, whether it's significant or not. I think that's why that's what for me you need to do those things to be happy every
yeah,
day.
yeah. Like if it was for salary, I would have been, yeah, not in a not for
Yeah.
profit, not in a not for profit setting.
Well, that's it. I think this has been great. So thanks for doing it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pat. It was great talking to you again. I haven't seen you in
Yeah,
forever.
you too.